you asked me 20 years ago when I was doing my PhD, I thought we were 250 years from building human-level AI. Every year that's gone by, I've shaved a decade off that.
Do you think we're about to have massive job losses? It's been suggested that 1 in 7 service jobs will disappear.
If you can free up whole jobs with AI, we probably will.
From your sort of 25 years in AI, you just think people have got completely wrong.
There is no such thing as AI ethics. I think that most organizations are misinvesting, that nobody knows what's going to happen beyond 5 years.
You might not have laid anybody off at WPP, but you've got fewer people doing the same amount of work that you had a few years ago.
The hypothesis is, can we and should we build a machine that is conscious to try to mitigate the risk of superintelligence removing us from the equation? I am Daniel Hulme. I've been involved in AI for about 25 years. I have an academic background where my undergraduate, my PhD postdoctoral in AI from UCL. I ran a master's program in applied AI for many years, and I'm currently entrepreneur in residence at UCL, so I help them spin out deep tech companies. I started the company about 18 years ago from my PhD that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world, Tesco, PwC, others. I sold that to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, where I'm the chief AI officer, so I coordinate AI across about 100,000 people, and I get to start companies, invest in companies. I just started the company to try to solve machine consciousness. I'm really interested in the impact of AI on humanity.
Daniel, welcome to the show. What are some of these things that, from your sort of 25 years in AI, you just think people have got completely wrong?
I could argue that nobody's doing AI. I could argue that there is no such thing as AI ethics. I think that AIs at the moment are like intoxicated graduates, that AI isn't a bubble. It's very much like a mountain full of gold. That I think that most organizations are misinvesting in the application of AI, and that nobody knows what's going to happen beyond 5 years.
Fantastic. So we'll dig into some and all of those. One other thing which might be a nugget that we get into is, do you think we're about to have massive job losses? I mean, it's been suggested that 1 in 7 service jobs will disappear, professional service jobs. Do you think that's true, not true?
I think there are two extremes of the argument. The one extreme of the argument is that if you can free up whole jobs with AI, we probably will. You know, the capitalistic model to reduce costs, increase profits means that we will, or we'll stop hiring and remove roles. If that happens very quickly, the worry is that we create mass technological unemployment, our economies can't rebalance fast enough, and it will lead to social unrest. I think I think actually we need to lean into that problem. 4-day working week, UBI, whatever. We need mechanisms to take the edge off mass technological employment. The counter argument to that is by removing friction, which usually means human labor, from the creation and dissemination of goods, you can bring the cost of those goods down to zero. So imagine being born into a world where you can't access paid work, but everything you need to survive and thrive as a human is free. Your food, your healthcare, your energy, your transport, your education. I think that people are worried about a world without jobs, but I actually think what it will do is it will free people to live their true humanity. And I often ask people, what would you do if you didn't have to do paid work and everything was free? Most people will say they'll play golf and they'll indulge in their hobbies and they'll travel and read, etc. If you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is they want to do something that makes the world better. So I think the promise of AI is a world where you're freeing people up to be able to allow them to use their time to make the world better for more people.
Look, you've been the chief AI officer. Like, if you'd been appointed in 2025, it would feel like it was absolutely on trend. But you've been the chief AI officer for WPP for yonks, like even before AI was trendy. And how long have you been the chief AI officer?
So I've been since 2021, and part of that was an acquisition of my AI company into WPP, and despite by the way knowing nothing about marketing, and I still like to claim I know nothing about marketing because it allows me to ask stupid questions, but I've been in that role since 2001 primarily because the CTO, the CEO at the time, Mark Reed, COO, the leadership understood the importance of AI. Even before AI happened in most industries, they understood that they have a complex supply chain to apply AI to, and that AI was going to completely transform marketing, and they bet right.
And what are some of the things that have come into being as AI has impacted that complex supply chain? What are some of the things that you have seen or initiatives that you've been part of that have are starting to transform how it all works.
Of course, AI governance is a really important thing. Understanding how to deploy technology safely and responsibly has become even more paramount, because we can now deploy software that can have a material impact on people's lives. The ability to create content obviously is amazing because of large language models, but the ability to build representative audiences, to test content against synthetic audiences, is actually, I think, an amazing innovation. And I think we're going to, over the next several years, understanding how people perceive content, understanding how to influence people in a safe and responsible way is going to become a superpower. And of course, agents are going to completely transform how organizations operate. Marketing, in some respects, is at the forefront of these technologies. We're expected to understand how these technologies will develop, how they'll impact the world. So we are typically the ones that are trying to innovate ourselves before our clients.
That synthetic audience, are there commercially available tools that people can use to do that, or is that tech that you've built inside WPP?
We build primarily our own technology. We built a platform called WPP Open, which is the end-to-end platform that solves marketing. My job is to make sure that Open has the intelligence behind it that differentiates ourselves from our competitors. And from an audience perspective, what's interesting is it's not actually a technological problem, it's a data problem. So historically in marketing, there's been a trend to collect people's names, addresses, dates of birth, gender, who you are, and where you live, and how old you are is a proxy for how you're going to perceive something. So how you perceive an ad or a HR policy or some promotion material will depend on the weather, the time of the day, whether you've just fallen in love, how well your football team played at the weekend. Understanding the data to represent human behavior is the key differentiator.
Okay. And you've been able to build models that allow people to test live now, that allow people to test content to say, how is this going to work? So when you launch it, you're not wasting money testing on the market. You're testing against your synthetic audience first.
Exactly. You can boot up synthetic focus groups, and that allows you to then test content, which you can now build very, very rapidly against those focus groups to understand how they think and feel about things.
How do you test the validity of that? You're looking for improvement on ROI?
Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you're eliciting the signals that you want to activate. So if I create a campaign for a horror movie, me as a creative might want to elicit the sense or the feeling of fear and anticipation and excitement. And so how do I know that? Well, I have to have a focus group to test that against. I'm assuming that those activations are going to ultimately lead to performance, clicks, likes, and sales, which is a different problem. Performance prediction requires machine learning. It doesn't require generative AI. So the first thing I want to do is understand, how do people think and feel about this? And then do I expect those thoughts and feelings to ultimately lead and contribute to clicks, likes, and sales? Interestingly, if I say to you, what product do you think about if I say safe cars?
I think Volvo. I've been conditioned to say Volvo.
What about extreme sports?
Skiing. Extreme skiing.
What product do you think about if I say extreme
Red
sports?
Bull.
Okay. What about, tricky one, Christmas?
Advent calendar.
Yeah, well, most people will say Coca-Cola or something like that. Something to do with chocolate.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Now, when you say Coca-Cola, it's fine because I don't drink Coca-Cola.
There you go. But what I'm doing is ultimately I'm activating neurons in your brain, and those neurons are activating other neurons. And what we want to do is want to understand, how do people make those associations? Because in the future, what we need to do is figure out, how do we reinforce or decouple those associations.
Yes. Okay. And are these focus groups AI, or is this machine learning?
AI. So they're
Okay.
large language models that we can get to represent audiences. But again, the differentiator is the data that we then train those models. So if you want to,
so it's a WPP model.
Well, they're off the shelf models that we then train using our own proprietary data, third party data, other data sources. Even Reddit, right, is a good place to actually find out where people think of. If I asked you, how might an audience perceive this type of perfume? Well, Amazon reviews might be a good place to understand how people think about perfume. So you've got to be quite smart about understanding what are the data sources you need to build representative audience. If you're trying to sell to a C-suite, well, what data do you need to be able to represent that species? Maybe you need to get Gartner and Forrester reports, but you need to understand what is it that they're reading that are influencing their perception.
Fab. That's great. Have you improved? And then the other thing was generating content. So are you able to measure the sort of percentage impact of either the efficiency of generating or the impact of the content that you're now generating? Like, is it like 30% better than it was 5 years ago? Or
we have a whole team at the moment kind of looking at the kind of carbon impact, etc. on the use of AI. What's interesting is that the creatives are able to come up with more ideas, and unless you can sort of A/B test those ideas, run them in the market, it's very hard actually to demonstrate whether one idea is better than another. What we are seeing are creatives doing more with less, and the expectation is that that's going to enable brands to make sure that they are more visible compared to their competitors. We have trained AIs in the sort of complex creative process of our geniuses. We back tested it against RFPs, and what's happened is that it's able to come up with ideas from those briefs that would have won Cannes Lions. So we know we can get AI to the point where it's now winning or potentially winning, creating award-winning ideas. But what is exciting about that is it's giving our creatives the ability to come up with hundreds of award-winning ideas. It's pushing the boundaries of creativity.
Fab. Does it make the best people 10 times better, or does it make average people 100 times better?
I think both, actually. I think that it's at the moment we're taking all of the knowledge, all of our data capability in WPP, and then making that accessible to everybody across the WPP. So it's like having access to a superpower.
Look, and one of the things you said earlier was nobody's doing AI, which must be mad because everyone's doing AI. So what are we doing if we're not doing AI?
It depends on the definition of AI, and for most people, AI started 3 years ago with ChatGPT, and there's a very popular definition of AI, which I think is the weakest definition, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. And the reason why it's a weak definition is because humans can find patterns in about 4 dimensions. We can solve problems up to 7. And when we get machines like ChatGPT to do things that humans can do, corresponding natural language, recognize objects and images, and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. There's lots of books out there that will convince you that humans are not that intelligent. And if I built a machine that could behave like a bumblebee, actually my PhD 20 years ago was trying to model the brain of a bumblebee machine. If you can build a machine that operates like a bumblebee, it would be the most intelligent machine we've ever built. So benchmarking machines against humans is a very silly thing to do. There's a very good definition of AI that comes from the definition of intelligence. So instead of using human beings as a pinnacle of intelligence, the definition of intelligence is goal-directed adaptive behavior. It's building systems that can make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions. And again, if I'm honest with you, if we held what we do in industry to that definition, most systems are not adaptive. They're automation. They make a decision, you give them the same data, they make the same decision. The definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different answer. Most systems at the moment are automation. They're not adaptive. So for me, the true paradigm of AI are systems that can safely adapt themselves in production. But the reality is, of course, everybody's doing AI, and actually I think that looking at AI through definitions, through technologies, is not healthy. And over the past several years, I've developed a framework for organizations to think about AI through applications as opposed to definitions.
Okay, what do you mean by applications?
So if you look across most supply chains in any industry, most frictions can actually be characterized or categorized in one of these 6 applications. So one of the applications is content generation, whether it be creating ads or policies or promotion materials. Another application might be insight extraction. What you want to do is you want to surface insights from complex data sources. Another application is complex decision making. And the point here is that rather than starting with the technology, you start with the application. Is this an insight problem? Or is it a content generation problem? Or is it a complex decision problem? Because that will then help us understand what the right algorithms are to solve those problems. Because if it's a complex decision problem, you don't want to be using generative AI. You want to be using what used to be called operations research or optimization. So it helps you understand what the right technologies are to solve the right problems once you look at it through the lens of applications.
And I think this segues into one of the other things you said, which is there's no ethics in AI. This sort of adaptive system thing, that Skynet and Terminator. If we give it the wrong context or the wrong parameters to solve for, it'll kill us all and turn us into paper clips.
Yeah. So go back to this definition: goal-directed adaptive behavior. So humans arguably have our own intent. Right? We have an intent which is to make sure that we're fed when we're hungry and to mate, and we've got these complex things that we're having to trade off to try and achieve some sort of goal, and that goal is complex. What we do as human beings is that we give a goal to an AI, and just like you've just described, an AI at the moment doesn't have intent. Humans have intent, and it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. All the AI is doing is trying to achieve a goal. It doesn't know or isn't purposefully exploiting unconscious biases. It doesn't have the intent to harm people. It's just achieving its goal despite the implications of achieving its goal.
Aha. And what are you bullish on the fact that Skynet doesn't take over the world and we all end up being slaves to AI?
I am worried about it. I think if you asked me 20 years ago when I was doing my PhD modeling bumblebee brains, I thought we were 250 years from building human level AI. Every year that's gone by, I've shaved a decade off that. So this, what you're referring to is a technological singularity, the point in time where we build a brain a million times smarter than us. And I guess my community felt this wasn't going to happen for another 40 years because of the arms race around AI and ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff. We now think it's probably 5 to 10 years away. So that's one of the reasons why I actually have started the company that I've spun out of WPP to try to solve machine consciousness. So going back to your point about AI's intent, if you gave an AI, a very super intelligent AI zombie, the intent to go and create paper clips, it will then use all the resources in the universe to then create paper clips despite its impact on humanity. The goal of building an AI that is conscious, the hypothesis is, can we and should we build a machine that is conscious? Because a conscious machine might empathize with things that feel pain. It might understand and value things that are conscious in the same way that we do. So the goal of Conscium, this consciousness company, is to ask the question, could we build machines that are conscious to try to mitigate the risk of super intelligence removing us from the equation?
I think that empathy about animals, that it's interesting because it feels like a very Western thing. Like it feels completely normal when I'm here having this conversation with you. But if I go to Asia, where, I was in Bali a little while ago and I just read a book called The Traveller's Guide to Medieval Britain. Right. And so it's a history book, but written as if you were going to medieval England as a destination. So it sort of says, this is where you should stay. This is what you should eat. This is the tourist attractions. Right. So it's written from that context. And in medieval Britain, cockfighting was the national sport. There was no value on human life. And then I'm in Bali and cockfighting is the national sport. And there seems to be very little value on human life, except everyone has fiber broadband and a scooter. And it was like medieval England with technology sort of just layered in without any of the cultural changes. And so I came away thinking, we have this construct that we always think everyone is like us. Otherwise, I think we get overwhelmed. But I think in large parts of the world, people don't have huge empathy for other lives or life, and certainly animal cruelty or even industrialized farming is completely rational for some people and totally abhorrent to others. And so why would AI be in one camp and not another? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not saying it will be or won't be, but to think it might be in one and not the other for some reason seems that would be an even further evolutionary step, maybe.
Well, that's why it's a hypothesis. Should we create a machine that is conscious? And if, as we go on that journey, we realize that it's not a sensible thing to do, we'll be the first one advocating against building towards conscious machines. But the hypothesis right now is that building a machine that has empathy, that can understand suffering, that it will potentially protect us from that.
And so that's the purpose of this new business, is to see if that's possible, or is it are you building something, or are you?
Yeah, so there's, as you probably know, the rhetoric around large language models is they're horrendously energy inefficient. They learn very slowly. They don't adapt very quickly. They require lots and lots and lots of data to learn. They are crude representations of our brain. Your brain operates on a powerful light bulb. You learn extremely quickly. I only have to say that's a that's a phone, and you know what phones are. You don't have to see millions examples of phones. So there's a whole field in computer science called neuromorphics, which are essentially brain-inspired concepts that allow us to build much more efficient, adaptive machines. So what we're doing is we're taking those ideas, we're then building more adaptive AIs. And if we go back to this idea of adaptation being synonymous with intelligence, we want ultimately to build adaptive, intelligent machines. And there is a risk that we will spawn accidentally, actually, consciousness. Our consciousness, in some respects, has been born out of the interaction of these different things that allow us to be intelligent. And so the one of the goals of Conscium is to identify whether something's conscious or not, and mitigate the risk of causing it harm. But we also are investing in developing this new sort of substrate to allow people to build AIs that are more brain-like. And we're also launching our first product in 6 weeks to verify AIs. So we want to verify whether an AI has the knowledge to be able to do its job, the skills, the expertise to do its job. We also want to verify its ability to adapt, its plasticity, and also we want to verify whether it's conscious. So Conscium isn't just it's not a research organization. It's developing 2 products that we think are going to be incredibly important over the next 5 years.
Do you get time to play with AI tools yourself? Because I know you've got multiple jobs. Do you get time?
I do a little playing. I know that I get an email every day from people saying that their AI is conscious, and I think that actually we need to lean into that challenge. We either need to help people understand that they're not conscious and prove that they're not, but we also need to deal with the social implications of people building relationships with these technologies. But yes, I do use AI, probably not as much as most people, because arguably AI right now is like an intoxicated graduate, and it's regurgitating a lot of the text it's been trained on, which is the corpus of the internet. And arguably that's not the best representation of humanity, nor is it the most truthful representation of humanity. So I have to make sure that I'm researching academic literature, I'm applying the scientific method to make sure that I'm being sort of sober about my predictions rather than relying on the output of AIs.
And do you have any tech tools that are sort of in your personal stack that you use every day that you wouldn't have been using a few are there things that you use every day that you wouldn't have been using a few years ago?
Yeah, honestly, probably not really. Just because I was never a good coder, software developer. I'm an architect. I think about how do we architect complex systems and how do we think about the failure points and mitigate those failure points, whether that be people systems or AI systems or hybrids between the two.
One of the things we were chatting about before we were recording is, everybody's now on the agents are coming, agentic AI, and you said you think they're going to be a bit shitter than people think they are. What's your experience thus far at WPP, and maybe why do you think that they're not going to be what people think?
Well, I think I said that I used a technical term, which is going to be a shit show, which is So I do think that it's actually quite the useful analogy to think of these models right now as being like intoxicated graduates. So 8 years ago, they were like toddlers. They regurgitated some words. Most of it didn't make sense. We are seeing them move to like being able to do rudimentary reasoning. So to create new knowledge from logic, from reasoning. I think that this year, next year, we'll probably have a PhD level so they can do solve complex problems. I think in 2 years, maybe a bit longer, we'll have a postdoc, so something that can apply the scientific method. And by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pocket, so something that can not only solve complex problems, but also ask questions that humanity hasn't asked. But right now, most AIs are like intoxicated graduates. So you need to ask yourself, this agent I'm deploying, would I get an intoxicated graduate to do this job? And if the answer is no, then don't get an AI to do it. If the answer is yes, then it's probably going to be good. But it's not.
What jobs are possibly on the list that you'd say yes to an intoxicated graduate?
Things that are relatively mundane, repetitive, structured tasks. Things that where you require a graduate level to go out there and do some research for you and bring you back some knowledge. summarize documents, all that kind of stuff. You wouldn't necessarily
Yes.
need to have PhD level to do that kind of stuff. But I do think that capability is coming. And to answer your question about WPP, agents are not a year old. I was building multi-agent systems 23 years ago during my masters, and so we sort of foresaw the agentic revolution. We built our own agent builder that's allowing people across WPP to build their own agents in a safe way. So we have a self-serve model that allow people to build these technologies, and we have a governed model to make sure that we're identifying use cases where it requires much more depth in the building, the testing, the deployment of these technologies. I think what people fail to realize is that they're being given the ability to deploy software, and 80% of the cost in deploying software is testing and verification. And nobody wants to spend their time testing and verifying AIs. It's boring. But the reality is that testing and verification is incredibly important. It's going to be even more important as AIs are adapting themselves, which is why I think that actually verification is going to become a very important need, and hence the reason why Conscium is providing a product in that space.
I think that's a good segue into the job loss story. If I was reading between the lines earlier, you might not have laid anybody off at WPP, but you've got fewer people doing the same amount of work that you had a few years ago.
Well, now the reality is that the shape of our organisation will absolutely change. But what I think will happen is that AI is like an energy source. It will allow humanity to grow. There's going to be new channels, new opportunities to make sure that we're getting the right products in front of the right people at the right time. Creativity is going to become even more important. So understanding how to create content that resonates with people at the emotional level requires empathy. So of course, this industry is going to transform, but I actually think that over time we'll see a growth in the need for more effective marketing.
Are you keeping pace, or do you think you're winning relative to your competitors on this?
I'm biased, right? So I think
totally.
I think technologically we're way ahead, and I think the challenge is some of our competitors many years ago started on their consolidation journey. WPP still have lots of brands, and there's real value in those brands. And I think over the past 6 years with Mark Reed's tenure, he's gone through a real rapid consolidation. But my goal is to make sure that we are objectively better than our competitors, and the feedback that we get from clients, the feedback that we get from our partners is that that's true.
What about this bubble? Are we in a bubble, do you reckon?
I think people often refer to bubbles as being two different things. One is a financial bubble, and arguably, I'm not here to speculate about whether we are in a financial bubble, but there often is speculation and over speculation in technologies. But often people think of bubbles as being things that are hot air surrounded by a thin, shiny veneer, and that there's nothing inside them. The reality is that AI is absolutely transformative. Understanding how to apply AI will drive a massive amount of value across an organization. I liken it not to a bubble, but to a mountain full of gold. The challenge is, how do you mine for that gold in the most effective way? And most organizations don't have the tools, the capability, the knowledge to be able to go and mine for gold. So often there's a misinvestment in their expectation of finding value in this mountain because they're applying the wrong technologies, they're looking in the wrong places. What happens is that they blame the technology, say that it's the technology's fault, but the reality is that human beings are not good at understanding where to mine for gold. So I often say to people, if you want to strike gold, go and work with an organization that has a proven track record of consistently striking gold with AI. 10, 15 years ago, people were told to go and build data lakes, put Tableau or some sort of analytics layer on top, hire data scientists, machine learning experts, and then what will happen is that they will magically find insights from that data that will then lead to decisions. It was never going to happen. It was never going to happen because there wasn't a clear problem they were trying to solve for. And ask organizations now, 15 years later, is your data ready? And the answer is no. And what's happening right now is that people are getting very excited about generative AI. They then try and get told by people who don't know what they're talking about to go and apply generative AI to solving problems that are not fit for purpose. So I would argue 99.9% of the stuff that's knocking around LinkedIn is being regurgitated by people that have rebranded themselves as AI experts over the past 3 years. And people get told, CEOs get told that if you don't do this, then you're going to fail. And so I think it's just people misunderstanding misinvesting. They also are trying to find low-hanging fruits, quick wins. And actually, I would argue that if it's low-hanging fruit and a quick win, it's probably something that's going to be solved by an off-the-shelf solution in the next year. Most of the problems that you're going to need to solve for that are going to differentiate your supply chain from your competitors in an innovative way are not quick and are not easy to build. People also, want to build careers around AI, so they want to hire loads of AI people and say, look, I've built a team around AI. That's another thing. They're not going to attract and retain talent. That's the reality. And the other one is that if you haven't ever built and scaled software in your organization, you're probably not going to do the same thing for AI. So, but companies are being told by tech consultancies usually will help you build that technology. You'll be able to in-house it. You'll have your own team to support and maintain it. The reality is they'll be left with technology that doesn't work in 2 years' time, and the talent will have left.
Do you need to deploy something like Databricks to get your data in order to be able to then do a project on top, or are you able to ingest more unstructured data than you might have been able to in the past?
I think we start with the problem and then we work backwards. What's the problem that needs to get solved? Because some problems might need in-memory databases. They might need different types of structure for the data. I do think that ultimately getting your data together in a data lake over time is the absolute right strategy, right? But what you have to do usually is you have to take some of that data, put it in its own structure, its own model, its own database that's then interacting with an application. And then what you need to do is synchronize that data pool with the data lake. And often that synchronization doesn't happen, so you get what is called a data swamp. You've got two different data sources now that are not aligned. So always start with the problem and work backwards. Don't start with the data and work up.
And what if I was going to pick a difficult problem that I could solve now that I couldn't solve 3 years ago? What's the nature of these problems I should be thinking in my supply chain? What are the types of things?
Well, actually, I think there's still operations research type problems. So routing vehicles, allocating workforce. I think that these optimization type problems are still ripe for traditional algorithms. So I would still be looking for applications across your supply chain that require even basic task automation. So robotic process automation, if then else statements, macros. You can drive a massive amount of value by replacing repetitive, mundane structured tasks that human beings are doing by an algorithm. Some algorithms require complex decision making, but I would actually argue that that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck right now. Marketing is interesting because our supply chain has been unlocked by generative AI. The ability to create content very rapidly, the ability to just create synthetic audiences means that we can now do performance prediction better, which is machine learning. We can do channel optimization more effectively, which is optimization. So what it's done is it's unlocked our supply chain to allow us to disrupt us. And my job is to ensure that we're disrupting ourselves rather than being disrupted too. There are some industries where generative AI is not going to disrupt them. It's not going to disrupt industries where you have to grow stuff, distribute goods. It's not going to solve those problems more efficiently. Maybe in the future, maybe in 5 years' time, it will. But right now, it's primarily just good at creating content and representing audiences.
Okay. So some of that stuff like agriculture, that's not a generative AI thing. It's a machine learning thing.
And optimization. Yeah, exactly.
Self-driven tractors spraying exactly one plant, not the whole field. That's just an optimization with automation.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's the difference between automation and generative AI.
I think that if we go back to these 6 applications that I've mentioned, generative AI can be used across those 6 applications. But I think you always start out with what is it the problem? Is it an insight problem, a decision problem? And then work backwards. I guess arguably is that once we create robots that do understand world models and are able to kind of interact with the world in a general way that humans can do, then that's very exciting because you don't then have to build these very specific point solutions. But we're not there yet, and we won't be there yet for another 5 or so years.
I wanted to take you out of your chief AI officer role and think about your role as the CEO, because you've scaled the business. How many people? 300, did you say?
Yeah, so Satalia is now about 300 people inside WPP. I've just started this Conscium business that's about 20 people, again, geographically located globally.
I want to take you back to earlier on in your CEO journey. Often the leadership team that you start with isn't the leadership team that you finish with. So if you go back to when your leadership team emerged, how many of them are still with you at 300?
Very, very few. And actually, it's because I struggle with the term leadership. What tends to happen is companies raise funding and they get told to go and put these structures and hierarchies in place. And as they get bigger, the hierarchies are needed to be able to deal with the kind of span of control. Right? When you're 20 people or 40 people, then you sort of know what everybody's doing. But as soon as you start to get bigger, you need to then start to put hierarchies in. What I did with Satalia, and I was actually making my life difficult here because I was trying to be a services company, an application. I was trying to do all sorts of stuff, and I was trying to reinvent how a company works. But the philosophy that we have in Satalia is that we have dynamic hierarchies. So every single thing that we do in Satalia is a project. Even the company strategy is a project. And the question is, who's the best diverse group of experts to go and solve that problem? That company strategy is no more important than another project over here that's writing code for some client, or another project over here that's doing payroll. We just have to make sure that you always have the right people, diverse group of people, experts to be able to work on that project. So in Satalia, we have liquid hierarchies, and I actually think that's how organizations need to operate. And what happens is that leadership surfaces from those dynamics as opposed to being given to you. You even now, I would argue that I'm still the best CEO for Satalia, despite me not owning any of the shares. And even when I owned all of the shares, I still felt that if I wasn't the right CEO, I shouldn't be in that position.
Okay, I like that. My experience of growing or finding leaders in organizations is similar. It's creating a series of projects, and the right people end up with people following them, as opposed to a hierarchy. When you were prioritizing the sort of systematization that you had to do as you were scaling, what did you break? What did you break and fix first?
I started by saying we shouldn't have any rules, because what I would argue that, and even now we don't have any OKRs, we don't have any objective settings. If I'm honest with you, I think that OKRs, objective settings, are primarily put in place to manage 5% of the organization that are not pulling their weight. So what happens is you have to give them objectives, because if you don't, then you have to measure them against, how can you measure their performance against those objectives? So, and if you ask most people, do they value objective setting? Most people will say no. They tell their manager what their objectives are going to be. They dust it off 3 months' time, and then try and make sure that what they've done retrospectively aligns with those objectives. So I really struggle with putting things in place that are really just dealing with a minority of people. My job is, and I still maintain this, is to make sure that I hire hopefully kind of egoless people and give them the resources that they need to be able to do their job and then get out of their way. My job is to provide a North Star, strong North Star, remind people what the North Star is, give them people the opportunities to then move towards that North Star and then remove blockers.
And how do you hire those people? What's your top tip?
I am rubbish at hiring. I'd hire everybody if I could, because I think that everybody in the right structure can thrive. And because I often think the reason why some people struggle in organizations is because of the structures and processes. It's not because of their competence. So I actually don't think you can really know whether someone's going to fit in an organization until you give them a chance. And even that's complicated, right? Because they have to work in a team. That team might not be right for them, or a client that doesn't quite align. It's so complex and in some respects non-linear. I think it's unfair to say that one person isn't performing because of them. I think there are all sorts of other things that go on in our professional lives and our personal lives that often prevent us from being effective. So we try to just have adult conversations.
Do you have a top tip in terms of go-to-market that other people can learn from?
Oh, I actually did a closing keynote at Cambridge Tech Week a few weeks ago, and it was about my entrepreneurial journey, and I gave 16 tips before I ran out of time. I don't think there's any one. Knowing your customer is important. When I see business plans, most people say, I'm going to sell to Google, I'm going to sell to banks or retailers. You don't sell your services to organizations, you sell them to people. Understanding the people that you're selling to, why they're going to buy it, why they're not going to buy it, what their motives are. And it's usually 7 people in an organization you're selling to. That I think that for me is often missing from business plans. I guess from a leadership perspective, owning your dysfunctions. The dysfunctions that exist in your organization are your dysfunctions. So what you need to do is you need to solve them in yourself, or put somebody in a position between you and the organization so that your dysfunctions are not are not propagated across your company.
As the CEO, to win back time, quite often people just get, as the business scales, you just end up more and more in the admin and you're unable to do the things that only you can do. What did you put in place so that you could do, big deals, partnerships, raise money?
Oh, well, I was very fortunate because I think that a lot of the challenges that companies have, we didn't really have those challenges in Satalia because we didn't have those structures. I think, according to my therapist, 60% of the population have attachment disorders. So based on our upbringing as an infant, that will determine how you build and maintain relationships as an adult. And when you're in these organizations, and if 60% of the people are dysfunctional at dealing with relationships, then of course it's going to be problematic. Of course people are going to get anxious and all that. So the goal was actually to remove those structures that meant you were going to trigger people's traumas. And so I was very fortunate that Satalia scaled, and as we scaled, we didn't really feel it as much as probably most organizations.
Aha. What are the top 3 books that you think founder CEOs should pick up and read?
I actually don't think reading business books are so useful. I think if you read philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, read books that help you understand who you are as a human being. And I think that will probably help you out the most. So I'm a big fan of Robert Sapolsky. He wrote a book recently called Behave, which is a fantastic synopsis on what it means to be human. From an AI perspective, if I'm honest, I struggle. One of my friends is a guy called Callum Chase, and he wrote a book called Surviving AI, which I think is a great kind of macro book. I have a book on my shelf that I keep meaning to read. I met the author Craig Mundy from Microsoft and Eric Schmidt on. It's called Genesis. It's essentially looking through a geopolitical lens the emergence of AGI, quantum computing, and nuclear fusion. So if all of these 3 things happen in the next 5 or so years, it just changes everything. We have infinite intelligence, compute, and infinite energy. But it's written from a perspective of geopolitics.
Daniel, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Great to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.